Israel has, and I quote, perpetrated a concerted policy to destroy Gaza's healthcare system as part of a broader assault on Gaza, committing war crimes and the crimes against humanity of extermination. That's according to a new United Nations Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory. It notes that according to the World Health Organization, between the 7th of October 2023 and the 30th of July 2024 this year, Israel carried out nearly 500 attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza. A total of 747 people were killed directly in those attacks on healthcare facilities, and 969, nearly 1,000, were injured. 110 facilities were affected. They note that 78% of the attacks in the first few months were carried out through military force, while 35% involved obstruction of access, 9% militarised search and detention operations. Now, the attacks were, in the words of this commission, widespread and systematic, starting in the north of Gaza in the final months of 2023, later shifting to the centre of Gaza, December and January this year, then to the south, January to March this year, other areas April to June. They involved airstrikes against hospitals, causing considerable damage and multiple casualties, the Commission notes. The surrounding and besieging of hospital premises, goods and medical equipment being prevented from being allowed into the medical facilities, as well as preventing the exit and entry of civilians. Evacuation orders were issued, but safe evacuations prevented. Hospitals raided, hospital staff and patients arrested. Humanitarian agencies had their access obstructed. In the first few months, 7th of October to the 23rd of June this year, a reported 500 medical staff were killed. Doctors, nurses, paramedics. The Palestine Red Crescent additionally reported 19 of its staff and volunteers were killed. Many others have been detained and attacked. I quote, medical personnel stated that they believed they had been intentionally targeted. The report details how hundreds of medical personnel, including 3 hospital directors, the head of an orthopaedic department, alongside patients and journalists, were arrested by Israel security services forces in Shifa, Nazareth and Orda hospitals. They report how at least 2 senior medical personnel died in Israeli detention, while 128 health workers remain in Israeli detention, and the reports overwhelmingly paint a picture of utter barbarism in that detention. As of mid-July, says the report, 113 ambulances had been attacked, with at least 61 being damaged. The UN Commission documents direct attacks on medical convoys operated by the Red Cross, the UN, the Red Crescent and NGOs. They note 20 of the 36 hospitals in Gaza are now completely non-functional, with just 16 partially operating, with severe overcrowding and a bed capacity of just 1,490. Let me quote this because it's crucial. The attacks on and destruction of hospitals and the scale of traumatic injuries across the Gaza Strip have overwhelmed the remaining medical facilities, leading to a collapse of the healthcare system. The siege of Gaza, which has caused, inter alia, a lack of fuel and electricity, has severely affected the functioning of medical facilities and reduced the availability of life-saving equipment, medical supplies and medications. This has resulted in deprioritising patients with chronic illnesses, leading to avoidable complications and death. Facilities have suffered from insufficient potable water and sanitation, damaged or limited communication systems, understaffing and a lack of public health services. This really can't be emphasised enough. Imagine the healthcare system in a rich country that wasn't at war was suddenly destroyed in this fashion. That would impose mass death sentences on huge numbers of people. The destruction of a healthcare system in an overcrowded and already besieged, impoverished tiny strip of land which has been subjected to bombs and missiles with the explosive power of 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs, overrun by an invading army, its population displaced multiple times, subjected to a siege of the basic essentials of life, including food and yes, medicine. The destruction of a healthcare system in those circumstances over such a long period of time. Think of the consequences. Think of the death sentences every single day that imposes on Palestinians. I mean, other than the 100,000 Palestinians who've been injured by direct violence, think of cancer patients, think of those with heart conditions or respiratory conditions or diabetes or dementia, think of pregnant women, think of newborn babies. We could go on. There's a major reason why the biggest killer of Palestinians in Gaza, when all this is ended, I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine that, isn't it? but it will be known as excess deaths. That will be how you calculate those killed in total. It won't be the biggest killer, will not be direct violence. The bombs, the missiles, the bullets, the artillery. It will be because of factors like the destruction of healthcare in these apocalyptic conditions. Now, the Israeli state keeps imposing evacuation orders on hospitals. But as the Commission notes, the orders were not feasible, not issued in a coordinated fashion, and could not be implemented in a safe manner. They gave hospital administrations little time, just a few hours in some cases, to evacuate hundreds of patients. Israeli security forces did not assist, they note, in the safe evacuation of patients. There are examples they cite of the deliberate targeting of hospitals with sniper fire, the victims including, the Commission notes, medical staff and a pregnant woman who was killed. Medical staff and pregnant women killed by sniper fire from the IDF. They talk of mass graves in hospitals, of patients dying because of lack of oxygen after fuel and electricity was cut off. The report notes that Israel claims 85% of major medical facilities in Gaza were used by Hamas for terror operations, but they note the evidence was not provided by the Israeli state. In its conclusion, the report says that the offensive in Gaza since 7th of October has resulted in the destruction of the already weak healthcare system in the Gaza Strip, with detrimental long-term effects on the civilian population's right to health and life. That's a crucial point here. The resilience of the healthcare system was already weak because of Israel's siege of Gaza over so many years, the longest siege in modern history. Crucially, they say this. The Commission finds that Israel has implemented a concerted policy to destroy the healthcare system of Gaza. Israeli security forces have deliberately killed, wounded, arrested, detained, mistreated and tortured medical personnel and targeted medical vehicles, constituting the war crime of willful killing and mistreatment and the crime against humanity of extermination. There it is in black and white, one of the worst possible war crimes. Intentionally destroying the healthcare system of a people you have trapped and besieged during one of the most intense military bombardments in history. And therefore, this constitutes, as they note, the crime against humanity of extermination. They note this is in concert with preventing fuel and food and water and medicines and medical supplies getting in because of siege, and that these actions were not taken as the Israeli state claims to defeat Hamas and return the hostages, the official war aims, which Israel has failed to meet, but quote unquote as collective punishment against the Palestinians in Gaza. By attacking these hospitals, the Commission finds Israeli security forces failed to adhere to the principles of precaution, distinction and proportionality, constituting the war crimes of willful killing and attacks against protected objects, and that in the attacks on Shifa and Nasra hospitals, Israeli security forces considered the hospital premises and all surrounding areas as targetable without distinction and thus violated the principle of distinction. Given Israel's claims that hospitals are used for military purposes by Hamas without offering evidence, it is worth noting the Commission says with regard to Israeli security forces seizing the Turkish hospital for military purposes and establishing a military post therein, such actions were not required by the imperative of military necessity and thus amount to the war crime of seizing protected property. It's important to note too that they find Israel engaged in the deliberate destruction of sexual and reproductive healthcare facilities, which constitutes violent harm in particular against pregnant and postpartum and lactating women, and that has caused immediate physical and mental harm and suffering to women and girls and will have irreversible long-term effects on the mental health and physical, reproductive and fertility prospects of the Palestinian people as a group. It's clear reading all of this, just this one element that we're focusing on, the onslaught against the healthcare system, that this is genocide. And that was obvious clearly a very long time ago. And on that note, let's listen to two doctors, Tanya Haj Hassan and Thea Ahmed, who served in Gaza, as they take on how CNN framed this onslaught.
Is coming under attack. And you mentioned actually at the beginning about these evacuation orders. These evacuation orders are for 3 hospitals in the north. Kamal Adwan Hospital, Indonesian Hospital, and Al Auda Hospital. Why are hospitals still coming under evacuation orders? Why are we still hearing about hospitals coming under attack and healthcare workers being killed? I want to just mention Dr. Khalid Dassur, a colleague of mine who I worked with at Nasser Hospital, brilliant young surgeon. When the Israeli military surrounded the hospital, he refused to leave his patients. He stood with his patients and tried to keep them alive as water, electricity, and supplies were cut off. He was subsequently abducted, and for 6 months he languished in Israeli dungeons until he was released 2 days ago. Do you know what Dr. Khalid Dassur did? He went right back to Nasser Hospital and started working with patients again. I mean, if it wasn't for these Palestinian healthcare workers, we'd be in a much more grim situation. And the final thing I'll say is, 700 kids in Gaza, 700 infants never saw their first birthday in Gaza over the last year. 200 of them born and killed in this conflict, 200 of them born and killed in this assault. I mean, the situation is so dire. We need a ceasefire. We need it right now.
And Dr. Hassan, speaking of the evacuation orders in the north and now in the south that we've seen today, one resident of northern Gaza who was just this weekend had to flee once again told the Associated Press this, and I think it was jarring, telling, and striking, said this: since October 7 to the present day, this is the 12th time that I and my children, 8 individuals, have been homeless and thrown into the streets and do not know where to go. Where do you think what do you think is going to happen with this humanitarian crisis, with the additional factor of Gaza is about to enter the winter, which often brings heavy rain to the region?
Kate, in all honesty, a humanitarian crisis is what you deal with when you have a hurricane, what you deal with when you have an earthquake. You have an insult and a humanitarian response. This is my career. This is what I do for a living. Every single person who does this for a living will tell you the same thing. This is different. This is not a humanitarian crisis. Kate, and I'm going to say it very clearly for your viewers to hear, this is genocide. When 70% of the population that are killed are women and children, when the population is starved of food, of water, of medicine, when you have attacks, repeated attacks on all the hospitals, the clinics, the aid distribution sites, the humanitarian aid agencies that try to help. More UN workers have been killed in Gaza than in UN's history. When you have over 900 families that have been exterminated, that have been taken off of the civil registry, killed. When you have over 17,000 children that have lost one or both parents. When you have bakeries, aid distribution sites, churches, mosques, schools, and in the last 3 days, in the last 24 hours, in fact, a hospital today that was bombed, as you just reported, the hospital where I personally was working, and I can tell you, they are working every second of every day to try and sustain life when Israel's strategy and evidence on the ground suggests that they're doing the exact opposite. They were targeted today. There was a rehabilitation center that was targeted in the last 24 hours, and there was an orphanage that was targeted earlier this week. These are the types of places that are being targeted. And so it's really hard to hear it over and over and over again, framed in the way that it's being framed in the media, which frankly, Kate, is very misleading. It is very misleading. 365 days of this. Death tolls that are so far outdated. We have no idea how many people are killed, but I am genuinely afraid about what we're going to find out when the dust settles. History books will be written on this. And countries will have to reckon, media agencies will have to reckon with their major role in the genocide of an entire population and in the destruction of humanitarian law.
This crime is so huge and obscene, it is easy to find it just overwhelming. That the vast majority of our political and media elites still cannot call this crime out for what it is, well, what do you even say? Every day, some of the worst possible crimes it's possible to commit, all live streamed in front of us, directly facilitated by our own governments. And there are many reasons we have to bear witness. And one of them is this. No one must be allowed to say, I did not know what was really happening. You did. There was no excuses. No genocide has been so documented in real time. And that's why those who are complicit must never be allowed to get away with what they have done. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide media. Patreon.com/OwnJazzy4. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.